Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of the syndicated talk show, People of Distinction. The talk that gives you an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, alcoleenterprises.com, for more info. Email me through benji@alcoleenterprises.com if you'd like to get involved with what we have going. And as always, please continue to like and follow our broadcasts. People of Distinction is internationally syndicated solely due to the love and support that you all continue to give. We're available across all major distributors, and as long as you keep following, we're going to continue to put out the content. Now sit back and strap in, because on the line with us today, we have the impressive Michael P. Kloss. And we're going to be discussing his amazing book, The Book of Mary, a commentary on the Protoevangelium of James. It's available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a whole host of other places. Head on over there today and pick up your copies. And before we go any further, I want to take this opportunity and point out the fact that Michael was brought to our network by one of the best publishing firms in the business. People you already know, I'm talking about Author Reputation Press. So for my writers out there who are looking for someone to help move their fantastic books that they've created, look no further than ARP. You're going to want to head on over to authorreputationpress.com and gather all the ways that their fantastic team is going to help you do just that. And listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Michael here on the line. People, the moment you start to do research, you understand the conversation at hand. The Book of Mary is going to uncover the untold stories of her life, of her early life, in a captivating way. Truly, believe me when I tell you, whether you're a seeker of faith, a lover of history, or simply curious about the woman behind one of the most iconic figures in history, this conversation in this book will challenge what you thought you knew and inspire you to see Mary in a whole new light. This is going to be a fantastic conversation and a wonderful education. Sit back, strap in, and have your notebooks ready. Michael, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, I'm glad to be here and to talk with you.
Likewise, man. Listen, this is something that I'm thoroughly looking forward to. I mean, listen, when we look at the Bible, and the Bible being a book of Jesus in many ways, Mary gets lost in translation oftentimes. So to have a direct commentary on her life, I know a lot of people are going to gravitate towards this. So we're looking forward to it. First and foremost, man, what is the basic outline of the book?
The basic outline is to follow an ancient text that has been around for a couple of thousand years. The exact dating of the text has been in question, but for my conclusions, the text itself goes back to the age of the Old Testament. There is nothing in the Book of Mary that pertains to the New Testament. And the analysis that I can generate for the Book of Mary, which I believe is her actual testimony, it all takes place in the age of the Old Testament, not the New Testament. For example, the author begins with the story of the conception of Mary, and the story is a common biblical story in which there is a couple that have no children and they want to have a child. This is the recurring phase in the Old Testament. There are several instances of that happening in the biblical stories. And the same thing happens with Mary. Her parents are older. They have no children. They pray to God. They want to have a child. And eventually it takes 5 chapters in the testimony of Mary before her parents actually conceive of her, because it is Mary who's telling us the story. In the conception of Mary, it's unusual in one way because there is an angelic visitation to both her father, Joachim, and to her mother, Anna. They both have visitations, and they are both told that they are going to have a child. But when Anna has her visitation, she not only hears what the angel says, but it's almost as though she interrupts and says, if this happens to me, then from the very moment it is alive, I will dedicate her to the Lord all the days of its life, because she does not know if her child is going to be male or female. And when her mother and father finally get together, the moment of conception of Mary takes place at that time. The conception of Mary is a normal conception. They spend the night together, they have sex, and Anna, Mary's mother, has her conception, and the baby is going to be Mary. That takes about 5 sections in the testimony. Mm-hmm. Now, there are ancient manuscripts that also talk about what is going to happen, because there are many prophetic texts in the Old Testament, and that happens here. So, for example, in Isaiah 65, 17 to 18, it says, I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered or come to mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I am about to create Jerusalem as a joy and its people as a delight. This is a prophecy that looks ahead to the coming of the Messiah. And when I use the word Messiah, I am speaking of the Jewish Messiah. When Mary is 1 year old, she is born, and when she is born, it's recognized that she's a girl, because throughout the 9 months of pregnancy, they had no idea about the sex of the child. Yeah, so after Mary is born and she realizes it's a girl, she's delighted. And this is something that would be unusual in the days of the Old Testament, because parents generally wanted to have a male child, and female children were not respected as highly as they would today in many societies, although in many societies women are still not highly respected. And people often want to have a male child. But this is unconventional, that back in this time when a female child was born, the mother rejoiced. By the time Mary is 1 year old, we have the priests of the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem come to visit Mary's mother and father, to see Mary, because they are interested in her. And when they come to visit her at that time, the priests give her a blessing, and the high priests give her a blessing. The blessings that they give are a little bit ambiguous, but they're suggesting that what they're thinking is that Mary may be the mother of the Messiah. So the focus here is on Mary. And the Messiah is going to be born of a woman. So there is a tendency in what we read there that this is their hope. When we talk about the Jewish Messiah, we're talking about a distant descendant of King David. And the distant descendant of King David is going to be a male, but the male always has to be born of a woman. So the book of Mary features the woman, not the male. So it's always going to be a mother who is going to be the mother of the Messiah. And it looks like from a very early age, the priests believe that Mary may be the mother of the Messiah. This also indicates that Mary is of the house of David. She is of the house of David, not through patrilineal descent, but through matrilineal descent. And there are going to be texts in the Bible that indicates that this is the situation. When Mary is kept at home for the first 3 years of her life, she's kept in a sanctuary, and she is raised as a Nazarite, because when Anna heard the angel that she would have a child, she immediately dedicated that her child would be a Nazarite all the days of its life. And so Mary's destiny is to be a Nazarite. She is going to be dedicated to God through the temple all the days of her life. And this is where the priests come in when they come to see Mary, because they are involved from the very beginning. At the age of 3 years old, Mary is brought to the temple, and she's handed over to the temple, and she's going to live in the temple for the next 9 years. And when she's first welcomed into the temple, the priests have a prophecy that this child that they're welcoming is going to be the mother of the Messiah. So all of a sudden, Mary becomes very important to the priests of the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. And she's living with them, as I said, for 9 years. And they are expecting that she will probably be the mother of the Messiah, but they do not know how this will all work out. Later on, when Mary is 12 years old, she has to leave the temple. And again, this is a very critical situation because there are very strong conditions in the law of holiness associated with the temple that you can never have a blood defilement of the temple. What this means is that a woman who is menstruating would cause a blood defilement if she was entering into the temple. So that while a woman was menstruating, they would be away from the temple temporarily until their period was over, and then they could return to the temple. The reason why Mary had to leave the temple is because at the age of 12, she was almost ready to enter into the menarche, which is when women begin their menstruation. Mm-hmm. The average age at the time that Mary lived would have been around 13 years. But in order to be safe, the girls in the temple who were assisting in the temple, they had to leave at the age of 12 just for safety precautions in case somebody got their period. And so at that point, Mary had to leave the temple. And generally, when the girls left the temple, they weren't just tossed out. The priests would try to arrange marriages for them and have them set up for a life outside the temple. And this is essentially what happened to Mary. When she got at the age of 12, the priests had a conference what to do with her, and they called a collection of all of the widows that they could gather. And one of the widows was to be the intended husband of Mary. But when they chose out of the selection, they used a divine choice. God was involved in the choice, and the choice fell on Joseph. Joseph, however, was an elderly person. He was older. He had already had children that were already grown up, and he was the one that divine providence selected to be the husband of Mary. However, Joseph didn't want to be a husband of Mary. He says, I am too old for her. I have children that are grown up, and Mary's just a girl 12 years old. And he wanted to walk away, but the priest insisted that no, he was chosen by God, and it was his duty to do that. And so the priest ended up, rather than making Joseph marry Mary, what they did was they made him the guardian of Mary. So at that moment, once Joseph was picked, then Mary was consigned to Joseph, and they left the temple, and they lived in Joseph's house in Jerusalem. And then Joseph had to go about his business, and Mary continued to live in the house in Jerusalem. But one day, Mary went out to the well to get water, and when she went out to get water at the well, she had a miraculous experience in which the voice of God was heard. Now, we're talking about the age of the Old Testament, and with the voice of God said, when Mary went to get water, is Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. When Mary heard that, she didn't know what it was. When the voice of God, that happens many times in the Old Testament, it also happens in the New Testament as well. But when the voice of God is heard, everybody can hear, whether you have a good relationship with God or not, everybody hears the voice. And when Mary heard the voice, she was petrified, which is normal when people hear the voice of God. She looked around, could not find it, and fearfully she went home again. What the voice of God was doing, in fact, was courting Mary, because he wanted Mary to be the mother of the Messiah. The Messiah is going to be related to God because it's going to be a son of God. So this creates the relationship between God and Mary. And this was a part of her courtship. And then when she went back to the house and began her weaving that she was doing, then she did have an annunciation from an angel of the Lord. And the scene of the annunciation has its own unique characteristics, unlike later characteristics that you find in the New Testament, because this is the Old Testament we're dealing with, people in the age of the Old Testament. Mary grew up in the temple, and now that she's married to Joseph, she is asked to be the mother of the Messiah. Her problems, though, has to do not with the fact that she's a virgin. The problem that Mary has is that how can she have a child? How can she conceive? How can she deliver a child? Because in the ordinary situation, when somebody is first impregnated to become conception, there's going to be a blood discharge. And in the case when they have a child and a child is born, there is also a blood discharge. So these are the questions that Mary asked the angel. How is that possible for me? Because she did not understand how it could happen without there being a blood discharge, and this would be a contamination on the temple. It would be a contamination on the Holy of Holies of God, especially since the child that was promised to her would be the Messiah. In any case, she was told to trust the power of God, and she did that. She consented, and then she conceived of Jesus. Now, the book of Mary continues for several chapters in it, and it goes through the 9 months of pregnancy, various parts of her pregnancy, because when Mary becomes pregnant, there is going to be a question, how did she become pregnant? How did it happen? Nobody is going to understand that she had a mysterious power of God made her pregnant. And so she ran into difficulties because of that. One of the things that happened to Mary in the Protoevangelium is that she has something that we would call a divine amnesia. She doesn't know how she's got pregnant. So when people asked her how she got pregnant, she says, I don't know. I have never known a man, and yet I am pregnant. So this is why we refer to it as a divine amnesia, because it protected her from answering those questions. But eventually, after her 9 months is up, she has to give birth to Jesus. Now, when she gives birth to Jesus, it's the same question comes again. How is she going to give birth to Jesus through the power of God without causing any blood defilement? Because at this time, she is carrying the Messiah, and there are indications in the Old Testament that the Messiah is going to be the Son of the Most High, and there would be the whole problem of blood defilement again if she gave a child in a normal way. In this instance, though, when she has a child, there is going to be the power of God works again, but in this case, we see how it works. When she conceived her child, we did not see the power of God at work. It was just that the angel told her it would be there. But when she gives birth to the child, there are people, Joseph and a midwife, who actually see how Mary is born. So we have a visual reference that people can see what happens when Mary is born. And so this explains what it means, how the power of God affected Mary. And it is because of the power of God that both Mary was conceived as a virgin and she gave birth as a virgin. Those are common beliefs among many Christians, but there is also many people who say, well, that's impossible, it can't happen. Saying it happened because of the power of God doesn't mean anything. But the Protoevangelium does explain how it happens. It gives details on it. And all of the details that it gives correspond to the law of holiness in Judaism. Everything in the book of Mary, in the story of her life, because she is dedicated to the Lord, she is close to the Lord, and she follows the discipleship of being a Nazarite, which means she is always going to be holy to the Lord. And she has to obey all of the laws of the temple as it refers to the priests in the law of holiness. So this is basically what you need to understand what the book of Mary is all about. So staying within the age of the Old Testament, we can see how every incident in the Protoevangelium is justified because of the ancient Jewish practices and the law of holiness that they had. There is nothing in here that pertains to the New Testament. It is all pertains to the Old Testament. But the child of Mary is Jesus, and Jesus is going to redeem his people from their sins. When Jesus is finally born, it's approximately 5 years in the Common Era, 5 years BC, as many people would say, and Jesus is born. But there are no Christians. There would be no Christians for another 35 years. That's why nothing in the New Testament is pertinent to the Protoevangelium. The Protoevangelium has to be seen as an ancient text written in the age of the Old Testament, but it is prophetic in the fact that it points ahead to the New Testament. So that basically is the story in the Protoevangelium. And in the book and the analysis that I have written, it goes into all of the details and the explanations of how this all came about. Okay, I will pause there because that's basically my understanding of the Protoevangelium. But in order to understand how it really happened, why the Protoevangelium is not a late imposition using New Testament texts, it is because if you use New Testament text, you simply do not understand it. The only way to understand it is by using the Old Testament text. What this means, though, is that the Protoevangelium itself was written before anything in the New Testament. And because it is a prophetic text, it will help us to understand more deeply many of the instances in the New Testament where Jesus is clearly mentioned and Mary is mentioned and so on.
People, let me tell you, when I started off by saying that this was a fantastic education, I meant it, all right? Please believe it. We've barely scratched the surface. There's a lot left to be discovered. It's Amazon. It's Barnes & Noble. The book is called The Book of Mary by Michael P. Kloss. Head on over there today, pick up your copies, and get lost in all of this. A fantastic journey and a wonderful education to be received. You know where to go. Michael, this has been a true pleasure. Man, an absolute delight. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
Well, I thank you, Benji, and I was glad to be interviewed by you. Thank you very much.